I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with Dan Albas, an MP serving off there in Ottawa. Are you at home right now or are you in Ottawa?
I'm at my home office right now.
Oh, nice. Home for the summer tour, right?
Absolutely.
How's that going anyway? How's your summer tour going? You're out there knocking on doors, talking to people?
Yeah, this year we're specifically knocking on more doors, and that's been pretty good. It was a little tougher in July, though, Jim, because of the heat wave. But right now it's a little more rainy, not as smoky, so it's worked out pretty good. Also, lots of community events this year, and
Hmm.
so it's kind of fun to walk up to people and see what they're doing. But August is really where the dog days of summer start to come in, and people are busy doing their own thing. So when I get a chance to talk to someone about what's on their mind on their terms, it's always helpful to me.
We've had a fairly decent August so far. So far, so good. Maybe we're a couple of weeks away from the bulk of the fire season too, so that's good news for the Okanagan.
Yeah, well, I've been hearing from some local tourism businesses that they feel that it's been quite down,
Yeah.
and happy to discuss that. But for them, this is their make or break. This is what allows them to pay their bills for the rest of the year. But on the flip side, what I'm hearing mainly from people is things like housing, healthcare, general affordability, people that have mortgage payments that are going to be going up because of renewals. So, even though it is the dog days of summer and people are busy doing their own thing, I will say a lot of people right now are being kept up at night, and that's always a concern to me.
Yeah, it seems to be like that sentiment is all across Canada. And there was a tweet put out by the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, on I think Friday or this weekend. And it had, like they're really happy with their economic progress. And underneath that, there was a Toronto Star headline talking about, you probably saw it, talking about how interest rates are going to fall dramatically and the price of homes are going to go up and there's no recession. And there's been quite the reaction to that post for sure.
Well, this is the thing is that they tried to claim that it was that housing prices were all based of outside of the control of Canada. Yet, my leaders pointed out that out of the OECD countries, we have some of the highest land prices, even though we have more land than any other country. We're the second largest country in the world. So a lot of the things that the Liberals try to push off or divert attention away from their inflation-inducing habits of spending, spending, spending. On the flip side, they never seem to address these other issues. And now we see them talking and taking credit for when inflation drops. It's slowed actually because we're still seeing inflation. If you go to the grocery store, people are not seeing lower prices. What they are seeing is they're seeing smaller paychecks that for them they're having to make big tough decisions on, especially if you're a low income senior. That right now grocery prices are not getting cheaper, and Chrystia Freeland is not doing the job for you.
Right. And inflation just naturally slows because as the number gets bigger, it just naturally slows because you just do basic math. That's how it works, right? So the percentages will get smaller and smaller as we move further and further away from it. But if you compare last year versus the year before and the year before, that inflationary number is still pretty high.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? With groceries, it's a big challenge because again, it's linked heavily to gas prices, which is one of the reasons why my leader continually goes back to the carbon tax. Because when you tax the farmer who makes the food, and you
Right.
tax the trucker that ships the food, then of course the grocery store is going to tell you, of course we have to raise it. And this is something when people ask me about this, I say, go talk to your local vendor where you get your groceries from and ask them about how gas prices directly relate to the costs they pay. And that's one of the major problems in a country as big and as cold as Canada, that we are linked, our groceries particularly. Just ask anyone up north, uh, is linked directly to the cost of what it takes to transport. So,
Well,
so
just taking
axing a
a
tax will give people
yeah.
some relief right away in a whole host of industries.
Taking a line from your leader, common sense. If the inputs are going up, obviously, whatever you make with those inputs is going to cost more money. It's just common sense. So,
Yep, and you know what? And if I have a agri-food business, he basically brings in some of his inputs from places like New Brunswick or Quebec, and it's a premium product, and many of us would recognize it if we saw it at a local grocery store. But he will often get, and he's brought me the bills over a period of time, where he will not just be charged a carbon tax, but a carbon fee or a carbon levy that gets added onto the gas. And
By the trucking companies.
he by the trucking companies.
Yeah.
And I've raised this with Justin Trudeau directly in the House, that these are equivalent of junk fees that he is allowed to happen by allowing them to say that they're carbon tax related.
Yeah.
And the government has not done a thing to clamp down on this practice, despite trucking, interprovincial trucking, being under the federal sphere. So at the end of the day, the carbon tax is driving the costs up, and it's allowing some of these trucking companies to add these extra levies that are making it almost impossible. Like, look, this is a agricultural business, and he prides himself on buying everything in Canada, including glass. Now, if he's going to get put out of business because someone can offer the same thing by purchasing glass abroad, that puts him at a disadvantage, and that puts us at loss of choice. And he directly says, if you cut the carbon tax and I was to see a direct drop, I would continue to buy Canadian. So these are the choices the government has made, and they are showing no evidence, Jim. They may welcome some positive news here and there on the fringe and then try to say that it's from them. But let's be clear, the higher prices that we see are not going away. The what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of inflation at grocery costs is not going to be going away under this government. They've made some policy choices that have led us to where we are right now. And the only way to get off that path is to make new choices, as my leader said, like axing the tax.
Yeah, you made a point earlier that Canada's the second largest country in the world by landmass, for sure. And that requires a lot of trucking, right? Because if you want to go from coast to coast, and we don't have really big manufacturing centers, we have some of our major cities, but it's not like where you're in a very populated area in some of the United States where we have to get, if somebody's ordering glass, it's coming from a longer distance or packing materials or whatever. So if you drive any highways in British Columbia, you will see truck after truck after truck after truck, right? And
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
train, trucks, trains, and tractors. That's what's bringing the food and the goods to your home.
And one further point, Chrystia Freeland, when we saw the Bank of Canada drop by 25 basis points recently, immediately said, look, our plan is working, right? Okay, so the Bank of Canada makes a small adjustment, even though banks like Nova Scotia, Scotiabank, I should say, has said that they've, by all their extra spending, have made it harder for the Bank of Canada. But let's just say that. But the thing is that as the Bank of Canada looks to go lower in interest rates, it diverges from the United States and the Federal Reserve interest rate. And the more you do that, and I don't want to get too technical here, but inevitably your dollar begins to suffer because money goes towards areas that will pay a higher interest rate.
Right.
So we actually are going to be seeing over the next few months where this divergence between Canada and the United States when it comes to that interest rate, you're actually going to see our dollar begin to drop. Right now it's around 73 cents to an American dollar, or so it's definitely going lower. And if we purchase goods and services from the United States, you're going to see those goods and services go up. So, for example, you want to buy a new washer, it's going to be much more expensive. You want to buy tires, it's going to be much more expensive because, again, the people that are selling you these items are going to say, well, that's the Canada US dollar. You have to pay it.
Yeah, magnifying that, if you go look on the Bank of Canada's balance sheets, they actually sold some debt in U.S. Denomination, which would make their interest payments even higher. And then to add to that, if people are buying, like you said, a lot of U.S. goods, obviously those prices are going to go up. And there's some economists out there saying the Canadian dollar could go to 50 cents, and that would be tragic.
Yes. Well, again, I always point back to those low-income pensioners in my riding that right now are not going out to our restaurants to eat. They are not going out and utilizing services locally because they can't afford to. And so suddenly they're saying to me, Dan, I'm not seeing these lower costs at the grocery store. They're basically scrambling right now, having to go to food banks in many cases. And that's really sad because, many of these people are very proud and have never relied on anyone else. But at the end of the day, if their foods are, if we're importing them from the United States, they're dependent on that Canadian dollar at least maintaining itself where they can keep their purchasing power. And that's the tough part about this government. And let's not let's not forget that Justin Trudeau said that when it comes to monetary policy, he doesn't think that that is an area that really he thinks about when it comes to helping families. Well, for many families that rely on being able to, or hoping to put some new wheels on so that they can drive safely this winter, or for an elderly widow uh, to be able to go to the grocery store and feed herself. These are the problems that we run into is that if you don't think about monetary policy, if you don't think about the very basics that go into your economy, it's always the poorest and those with the less means that are going to pay the penalty.
And it seems like Canadians are starting to see that, because another poll by Abacus is showing that the Conservatives are taking commanding lead, even in Quebec, that they're leading over the Liberals in Quebec in this latest poll. I don't know if you've seen the latest poll yet, or.
Well, I try not to look at polls because to me they're just a snapshot in time, and as the old saying goes, a week in politics is like a lifetime, and things can change. But the one thing I would say is Justin Trudeau's policies, are leading to where people are trying to. It's unifying the country, that they're not happy with his leadership.
Yeah, I think
And
they're starting to speak up, and they're starting to share their concerns, for sure, because it's really hurting. I mean, I talked to a lot of people too, and a lot of people are expressing that they're, not very far from not being able to meet their monthly obligations.
And that's what it is. It's really hard to have a discussion about redistributing wealth so that everyone gets a little bit more if the pie itself is shrinking, and on a per capita
Mm-hmm.
basis, our gross domestic product is getting smaller. And that is something that I think that all Canadians should be concerned with, because essentially GPD per capita allows us to be able to say, on the whole, are we individually getting better? Between that and making sure that we can purchase the things that we want to, especially when we're from other countries. That purchasing power parity is also another important metric, and I think that we're going to continue to see those areas, because the Trudeau government really hasn't moved a lot. In fact, it's gone into a bit of a cocoon. Some might say a fetal position, because I don't think they know what to do, and that's the big problem that we have right now. We got into these problems, Jim, not by accident. It's from decisions. And the problem is we've made a series of bad decisions. But the good news, I would say to your viewership here, is with new leadership, you can make different decisions, and you can get out of these problems bit by bit. And one of them is growing the pie and making sure that that the people can feed themselves. And that's really what Pierre Poilievre is talking about when he says, "Let's bring it home. Let's make sure that the government isn't taking too much of your paycheck if you're working. Let's make sure that we get rid of the carbon tax so that a pensioner can afford groceries again. Let's try and build a tax system that is more simplified and fair, where bringing it home means that people can invest in this country, and people that produce things will want to do it here rather than another country."
The last time you and I talked, we talked about the COVID vaccine mandate that was still prevalent in British Columbia. That has been lifted, I think, about a couple of weeks ago now. But we're still seeing the closures, obviously, because getting doctors back into communities like Merritt, when they lost 2 doctors, getting them back, and that's your riding. How do we get doctors back? Does Conservatives have a plan for getting doctors back into these more remote communities?
Yeah, just if you could just hold 1 second, because I think my dog is gonna start barking at someone. Just
Sure.
1 second.
Maybe we can figure out what books Dan's reading there if we zoom in.
Oh yeah, no, please do. So essentially, what we have in Canada is we've allowed paperwork and bureaucracy to be more important than people and their problems. This is a theme I've mentioned to you before. We're too deferential to those authorities. And so what we've seen right across the country is where essentially we've left it up to the health professionals themselves to regulate themselves. And while that can be a very beneficial thing because it's for efficient decisions, look, I trust doctors and nurses, but when it comes to keeping other nurses and doctors from other provinces or even other countries they can sometimes make the paperwork so onerous that you end up where you have someone who's a heart specialist who's driving an Uber. In fact, my leaders said a couple different times. Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has said a couple times that if you're having a heart attack, call an Uber because your chances are you'll get a doctor that will come. And it's maybe a bit of a joke, but it really does point out a truth in Canada. We've allowed thousands and tens of thousands of health professionals who are applying right now and are simply waiting to find out, do they qualify under their current credentials? And if not, what courses do they need to uptake? And then how do they pay for them? And this is after they've already come here as a landed immigrant with permanent residency. They were promised that they'd be able to practice, and they were given permission by the Canadian government to immigrate to Canada. And yet, where are they? Delivering pizzas, driving Ubers. That is a huge problem. So Pierre Poilievre has proposed a blue seal program, same as a red seal for trades, that allow for a skilled worker, such as an electrician or plumber, to work right across Canada with no questions asked. We want the same Blue Seal program to apply to health professionals. Now, there has been some progress provincially. Unfortunately, you can't change the dial for tens of thousands of people with just some small fringe changes in one province. We need to have this right across the country, and that will speed things up. Look, right now, it's easier for a radiologist, for example, the one profession, and this was done under the previous Harper government, where essentially you would have one certification for all of North America. So this is where someone, when they say, you know what, I'm going to go to the United States to practice, they could move tomorrow and start practicing their profession as long as they've given the proper notice, because they don't have the onerous paperwork that you have here in Canada, like other professionals. So that's one thing we can do right away. Another thing, though, is, Jim, and I've said this to you before, sometimes governments will say and do things just so that they can say that they did something, but they haven't done it in good faith. So it's been raised that there are, even though they say we're rescinding the vaccine mandates, they're now instituting other regulations that kind of do the same thing. And it's this lack of clarity. And the last thing is this: a lot of these nurses and other professionals have been disrespected by the government, but they haven't received an apology. Now, do they? I believe they deserve one. Sure. Because essentially they've been pushed out of the system, and in many cases they're now working in other jobs, and yet they're being told, well, forget all about this vaccine mandate. It's no longer a big thing. And essentially they have not been invited back. So this is where, a strong health minister would say, I'm going to bend over backwards to bring a lot of these people back in, because we know that there are good people who are trained in this area, that know our systems, who live in British Columbia, who pay taxes in British Columbia, but we've pushed them out. So this is an area where I think the government really can do a lot more to help bolster, because at the end of the day, it's the communities like Merritt, it's the communities like Oliver that are seeing their emergency service nixed and closed. And again, that's not sending the signals that places like Merritt are open for business if you're thinking about relocating a business there. There's incredible capacity. The people in Merritt are wonderful people, but they deserve to have the same level of protection in healthcare that someone in an urban area does. And so, and let's be mindful, it was the NDP government that opened up this emergency center in Merritt. They actually promised this and did this, even though the Merritt elected an opposition member. But now that at the same point, they're closing it on a regular basis with no explanation. So more needs to be done, I think, to bridge that gap. And I believe that Pierre Poilievre has proposed what is probably going to be long-term one of the most helpful things, is to have it where we can easily have people that have skills to be credentialed quickly and earnestly within, regardless of which province they live in, or as long as they have the correct credentials.
Changing gears, wildfires and forestry, I'll kind of like mix those two up there. We've seen that big tragedy there with Jasper. And then the reports coming out say that was heavy fuel loads, and they were warned about it, and yet there was nothing done to remove some of that fuel load. And then someone sent me a report today to say Whistler may be in that same position right now. So How does the federal government help in that regard in wildfire mitigation? Most people say in government that there's just not enough money to do it. And then I talked to some people in forestry in BC, and they say that they won't even give us the trees to cut, and they only cut 50% of the trees they did before. And then I got a report sent to me today from Kofi, I think, saying that in New Zealand and Finland, where they actively manage their forests better, have younger forests, they have, like minimal fires compared to British Columbia.
Yeah, I was speaking to a former forestry expert. He's retired now, but he had actually gone to Finland and actually had told me that there's a trilateral group where the community, industry, and the government all work together on a plan so that there is a sequential, constant working between logging, between thinning, and getting rid of the material, and then going to their bioenergy so they can power their own needs. It's quite an interesting model. Now, whether or not that could work in a place like Canada, I will leave that to other experts. But it does sound that there are other models to look at. But look, we have to be proactive. Fire suppression is costly, and it really hurts not just the wildlife, but the air particulate, and of course the people that lose their homes. So who needs to take responsibility here? Well, Jasper National Park is a national park, and the previous member for the area had in 2017 on behalf of the community at Jasper had said countless times, there is a tinder dry situation here. We need to have more done. If you look at the most recent report for Jasper National Park, even Parks Canada had said more work needed to be done. So I don't think the federal government, Stephen Guilbeault and the minister responsible, has been upfront with Canadians as to what their responsibilities are and what work was not done to be proactive, and that has made this whole situation worse. Now, the BC Wildlife Federation, I think I actually tweeted out from Kelowna Now, the executive director said that this is the direction that they want to see as an organization, the provincial government go in. But look, the province has a responsibility, and even local governments have a responsibility. I know in the area of West Kelowna, the Fire Smart program has been funded by the local council, and they're working with WFN to do a lot of the proactive work. But there's always going to be cases. Look, I was speaking to some residents in Kelowna who said between Dilworth Mountain and Knox Mountain, there are the same concerns about too much fuel load, tinder dry situations, and not enough stuff is being done with it. They gave the reference that the city of Kelowna actually had a pickup service that if you had a cedar hedge that you cut down, if you had some fuel load that you'd pulled, off of your property, that they would come and collect it. But yet they're not doing the same thing next to Knox Mountain and Dilworth. Why? Well, because there's no one that lives on Dilworth or on Knox Mountain itself. It's something that we all have a stake in. So I think that local government needs to take a look at these things and say, are we doing our part the way that the federal government should have done on Jasper, and the way the provincial government needs to do more, as the BC Wildlife Federation has said. This is not rocket science. But and we can have arguments about climate change. We can have arguments about axing the tax, et cetera. But this is happening under a Liberal NDP government federally and provincially, and they are in lockstep raising carbon taxes, and they are at the same time not doing the work that I think citizens want to see them do. And I think it would be helpful if local municipalities like Kelowna were to start doing those same analysis and start taking action the way that some other municipalities have.
Yeah, I've talked to a few forestry companies. They say they only got 50% of their cut last year. And if they could cut more trees, we'd have younger forests, and they would be part of the solution for wildfires. And it doesn't seem to be part of the plan there. There's a lot of bureaucracy to get permits, even to cut trees that have been burnt or killed with pine beetle. And there's a documentary out there done in Merritt, and they talk about just not being able to get permits to even cut down burnt trees and or ones killed with pine beetle.
And this is a very Canadian problem. As I said, we are becoming so deferential to the bureaucracy that it becomes more important to do paperwork than it is to focus on the people and the problems that are associated with them. So in this case, you have where companies see it with their own eyes. They're the ones that live, like Aspen Planers in Merritt. I've spoken to them. They see these hills and where there are real opportunities for them to come in and to clear out a lot of this stuff that will better prepare and make our forests safer. But because of the way that the NDP provincial government has set up the program, is that falls to the wayside. It's the process. You have to tick all these boxes first, and then you end up where you have a forest fire, and now you have the wildlife, the particulate, the loss of wood, the loss of potentially property. The problem is we've allowed in this country the paperwork to dominate the conversation rather than the product. And this is where leadership is essential. This is where the provincial government needs to kind of take accountability for its own role and actually start to change their behaviors, start to change their processes. And that's really what leadership is about. The status quo, no one in this country appreciates. I can't think of one issue provincially or federally where people are satisfied and saying, hey, things are going great. Instead, what we see is we see these constant little divisions, and we see this constant deference to paperwork. And Jim, like I said, this is where my leader's making the case. He's doing these rallies right across the country. He's door knocking. I'm door knocking in my riding. I'm door knocking in other parts of the province. And we're trying to make the case that people need to have a change in leadership. That it's not just enough just to say, we're rescinding this bad policy. And then not see any concrete action.
You, in your column that you wrote again on Kelowna Now there, you talked about safety during wildfires and Bill C-18, how that is actually making communities unsafe. We suffer under Bill C-18. We've seen the effects of Bill C-18 across Canada and media outlets closing. We've seen some more closures being announced with Global making cuts here in the Valley. And, I can go on that. I think we've did ad nauseum. It's kind of a tough thing. There was an article written today about us by a media academic saying it doesn't seem right what's going on. It doesn't seem fair. And it's really hard to get audience with the federal government to see how can we, as a small local outlet, get audience with the federal government to say this is not working.
Well, so first of all, let's just talk about the general state of things. So Justin Trudeau said that he believes that media has an incredible role to play in telling not just local stories, but making sure people are informed of their democratic processes. But it doesn't matter what aspect of the government's program you look at, whether it becomes C-18, which is Meta essentially blocking content like yours and others. There's a blackout on it. Whether we're talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars, I think it's well over $700 million of direct support subsidizing journalism, which I think puts journalists in a very bad state. It also puts where there's constantly who gets it and who doesn't. And the one thing I think the global thing that I would say the situation here is, first of all, the program is not working. And it also has this incredibly divisive component where the government chooses media that it likes and purposely removes or exempts from the conversation media it doesn't like or doesn't know. So I'm not sure what the case is because I'm sure that they know who you are, Jim. I'm sure they know what Kelowna Now does for the local area, and they can just go on your site and see all the stories, both for local content, but also being done by journalism, by real journalists. But this is the problem is that the program that they have is not working. It's very expensive, both in terms of monetary costs, but also in terms of, I believe, causing the industry to look like it's on the government payroll. And when you're choosing some and excluding others, that is never a good policy.
Yeah, I'm going to step on a soapbox for a couple of seconds here. I did an interview with CBC, I think about a week ago now. It seems unjust into what's happening, and it's like they're funding our competition. At the same time, they're kind of like standing on our throat and saying we're here to help you without listening to us. Like we can barely, they won't give us audience to talk about the issue. And while they fund the competition to weaken us. and it seems very, very unfair. And I don't think, in reality, that government should be funding journalism. I think if we want to have a free and independent media, I think media has to stand on its own. But
Well, but this is the problem is that when you're picking winners and losers, you're inevitably always going to be in the business, and it's always going to be divisive. At least where you have a more of a free market approach, as you're talking about, it's based on what people want to see and read. And I do know that from speaking to a lot of people, they especially during fires, people get really apprehensive if they're relying on second or third hand information on Facebook, which may or may not be true. And so, the local fire chiefs may do an excellent press conference to update people, but you won't hear about it except by through second or third hand means, and not by professional journalists, I should say. And so the issue we have here is we have a government that has said that it's looking out for the industry, but again, which part? And one area that I think that the Narcity piece really showed out to me, Jim, in reference to your company, is it says there seems to be an arbitrariness by the CRA. So the CRA they have a special committee that decides. And if you decide you're going to apply, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement with them. And so essentially, you're suddenly silenced about the process, what questions they ask, and what their criteria is. So the question I have that really makes me ponder is, okay, let's just imagine now that, let's say Kelowna Now or another groups applies for it, gets it, but then a year or so later they're delisted from them for whatever reason. You may not even be able to tell people why. And you may end up saying, could CRA, just like they did with some COVID payments, like the CERB, could they say, we're going to start clawing back from you now? And that would have a very punitive look to it as well, because this is the thing about this government. They often say, hand on heart, that they're there to help. Then they create these programs that have these onerous provisions on it. And if at some point down the road you fail on one of those things, it's not their failure, it's your failure. And then they demand the money back. So this is one of those things, Jim, is that could we see that kind of approach being taken by the CRA with some of these journalism organizations if the government suddenly doesn't like what they're doing or disagrees that what they're doing is quality journalism? I don't have any answers on that.
I think it's also like talking to the people in the newsroom. It's an insult to the journalists that work here too. We have Kent, who ran the CTV desk here, so he must have been a journalist at one time, and then Steve McNall, who's probably one of the most prolific business reporters here for the last 30 years, and then Ian, who's worked at the Daily Mail. And, and Josh has been here almost like 8 years. I mean, we have every one of us gone through BCIT or something. They've done their education. And it seems insulting, actually, in a way, to say who is and who isn't, right? Like, if you're going to do something, then at least be fair about what you do.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, is that they're also not even letting people disclose the process itself. And that, to me, should just raise questions. Look, in a free and open society, we should be able to challenge, the authority. But if you're signing an NDA with a government on something that should not be a national state secret, to me, it's incredible that they can give this kind of money without having to disclose some of these things. So, look, good journalism is important to society, but it's not a state secret.
Yeah, I don't want to stand on that soapbox too much. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about our own situation all the time, but it would be nice if we could
you
get
can't
at
stick
least
up for yourself, Jim, who is going to?
it would be good to at least get audience with the people that are saying, again, Meta uses the same legislation that the government is using, and they have a different answer. So that doesn't seem right. Like, we would rather take our Facebook audience back than take the money. We'd just rather we earned that audience over 10 plus years, over 200,000 people, and they took that away. And I mean, we see Meta as a symbiotic relationship. We never asked them for money, nor were we ever going to ask them for money. We gave them content, they gave us traffic, and it was a good relationship.
Yeah, and again, that's something that you should be allowed to do, I think. And Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has pledged that he's going to eliminate C-18. And I think that that would allow Meta to come back to the news market, and it would deal with a lot of these concerns. Now, the reason why the Liberals haven't done that, well, is they were told. They were told at the committee, the Heritage Committee, by small startups. They were told by industry watchers, and they were told by the opposition that this would end up exactly where we are right now. And the government didn't believe that Meta would call their bluff and remove themselves from that market. And so now it's our viewers, your viewers, I should say, that are the ones that are ultimately losing when they can't find good quality information where they need to. Now, some people say to me, "Oh, Dan, you're not." People can still go to their website. The reason why people go to Facebook is because they want to see what their relatives and their friends and associates are doing. And that's how a lot of people get their news now. That is just part of how it works. It's an aggregator, and you've essentially stomped out that section of it, so people are not engaging about those issues anymore.
I did that interview with CBC, and then there's a report that just came out. It's been a year now, just a little bit over a year and a week or so. 11 million less views per day of news for Canadians. So obviously it's hurting that. And if you go look at Meta's stock chart, it's straight up. And if you go look at a stock chart of Chorus, which is global, and it's straight down. So that pretty much tells you the picture.
Just on the topic of global, because I've been seeing some of the reporting that Kent Mulgad has done through Kelowna Now, and the interviews you've done with Mohini Singh in regards to the global Okanagan. First of all, I haven't had a chance to say that I'm really sorry to read that some very good long-term Kelowna-centered people, have been let go. I also know, though, that Chorus is in a completely difficult situation because, from my understanding, from watching market and listening to what's happening, is that they're near bankruptcy. So if this is the plan that Justin Trudeau said was going to save Canadian journalism, I think that's the term that he used, that we're going to save Canadian journalism. This is where we're at, folks, where you have, if the big guys can't make it work, and if the small ones can't make it work, the question is, who is it working for? And do you want that person to continue that plan? I would suggest that the majority of people in Central Okanagan, when I talk to them about this, would say we're spending huge amounts of money and in the wrong ways, and we end up with the wrong results. That's something that needs to change.
We are getting some national attention. Like I said, CBC did a story on us. Canadian Press did a story. And even our friends over at Castanet came out and said that, Kelowna Now should be recognized as a news source. And we've sent out some letters to politicians to say something. Like I said, we would just rather have our audience back. That's all we really want, is what we earned. We're not asking for anything else other than what we earned. So we're hoping.
Fair to me.
What's that?
Sounds fair to me.
Is there anything else you want to touch on, Dan?
No, I'm really happy that we got a chance to kind of go over all these issues, and that we could talk about these things. And I'm going to continue my listening tour. So if people would like for me to give them a call, just please feel free to call my constituency office. It's 1-800-665-8711, and I do pride myself on returning phone calls.
That's great, and thank you, Dan. Again, you always are. What's that?
1-800-665-8711. You always got to say it twice, Jim.
There you go. You're always great at making yourself available, and we thank you for that too. And we thank you for your support. And we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.